The neon sign flickered erratically outside the small, run-down motel, casting a garish red and blue glow across the cracked pavement. The Pines Motel, it read, but the name felt like a cruel joke. The pines surrounding the property were twisted and gnarled, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky like the fingers of long-forgotten souls. Inside, the air was stale and thick, infused with the lingering scent of cleaning supplies mixed with something less identifiable, something that clung to the walls like a memory. It was my first night as the night clerk, and I could feel the weight of the darkness settling in around me. I had taken the job at the Pines after losing my previous one, lured by the promise of easy hours and a steady paycheck. Little did I know that my nights would be filled with unsettling encounters and a growing sense of dread. As the clock struck 10, I sat behind the worn wooden reception desk, its surface marred with scratches and deep gouges. The fluorescent light above hummed softly, creating a strange rhythm that seemed to pulse in time with the flickering sign outside. I scanned the guest ledger, a dusty book filled with names and dates, some scribbled hastily, others meticulously penned. Most entries were mundane, families passing through, weary travelers seeking a night's rest. Yet, there were a few names that sent a chill down my spine. They were marked with a red pen, their details obscured by smudged ink and cryptic annotations. I glanced at the clock again. It was nearly time for my first guest. The manager, a grizzled man named Carl, had given me a list of strange rules to follow during my shift. "You'll want to memorize these," he said, his eyes darting around the empty lobby as if he were afraid of being overheard. "The Pines has a reputation. Just be careful." The rules were odd, but I forced them into the back of my mind as I prepared for my first customer. No room 13, I recalled. Never allow anyone to check into room 7 after midnight. The more I thought about them, the more unnerving they became. The sound of gravel crunching outside snapped me back to reality. A car pulled up, its headlights cutting through the darkness like a knife. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for my first encounter. The car door creaked open, and a figure stepped out. A woman, tall and slender, her silhouette illuminated by the fading light. She wore a long coat, its collar turned up against the chill of the night, and her dark hair cascaded down her shoulders in waves. As she approached the desk, I noticed her eyes, sharp and piercing, as if she were scrutinizing every detail of the motel with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. "Check in, please," she said, her voice smooth, yet somehow hollow. I nodded, forcing a smile as I grabbed the guest ledger. "Welcome to the Pines. Can I have your name?" "Lena," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "Room 5, please." I flipped to the appropriate page and began to write her information down. As I did, I felt a strange sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck. I glanced up, meeting her intense gaze. "You'll want to be careful," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "It can get a bit strange here at night." Her lips curled into a slight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I know," she replied cryptically. "I've been here before." That made my skin crawl. I quickly assigned her the key and handed it over, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling settling in my stomach. "If you need anything, just let me know," I said, but she was already walking away, her footsteps echoing down the dimly lit corridor. Once she disappeared from view, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I turned back to the ledger, my fingers brushing against the names as I scanned them again. Lena, I noted. Nothing about her seemed particularly off, at least not yet. The minutes dragged on, punctuated by the occasional rustle of leaves outside and the distant hoot of an owl. The motel was almost entirely quiet, save for the sound of my own thoughts echoing in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, the strange rules echoing in my head like a dark chant. No room 13. Never allow anyone to check into room 7 after midnight. Keep the door locked after 11 p.m. I glanced at the clock again. It was almost midnight, and I was starting to feel the weight of the night pressing down on me. Just as I was about to lose myself in thought, the door swung open again, and another guest stepped inside. This time, it was a man, stocky with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He trudged to the desk, his expression weary, eyes darting around as if expecting something to jump out at him from the shadows. "Got a room?" he asked, his voice gruff. "Of course," I replied, trying to match his energy. "What's your name?" "Danny," he said, glancing over his shoulder as if he sensed something lurking behind him. "Just need a place to crash." I quickly jotted down his details and handed him the key to room 2. "Just a reminder, sir, there are some rules here. Just be mindful of them, okay?" Danny waved his hand dismissively. Yeah, whatever, just give me the key." As he turned to leave, I hesitated. Wait, I called after him. "You're not checking into room 7, are you?" He turned back, frowning. "What's wrong with room 7? "Nothing," I lied quickly, my pulse quickening. It's out of order for maintenance." He shrugged, looking unconvinced. "Whatever, man, just give me my key." I did, and he shuffled off, leaving me alone in the lobby once more. The clock's hands edged toward midnight, and a cold sweat began to form at my brow. The rules swirled in my mind, a growing sense of anxiety. Just then, I remembered the last part of Carl's warning. If you hear a knock at your door after midnight, don't answer it, just stay quiet and wait for it to stop. I was about to chalk it up to nerves when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching again. My heart raced as I glanced at the clock. 12:05 a.m. The door creaked open and a figure stepped inside. It was Lena. She stood at the threshold, her eyes wide and filled with an indescribable fear. "I need your help," she said, her voice trembling. "What's wrong?" I asked, my pulse quickening as the atmosphere in the room shifted. "Room 5, it's not what it seems. You have to come with me." Before I could respond, a loud crash echoed from the direction of her room, reverberating through the lobby like the toll of a death knell. "Please," she begged, tears glistening in her eyes. "You have to help me." I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to turn away, but the fear in her voice was palpable, and against my better judgment, I found myself following her into the darkness of the motel corridors. The air grew colder as I followed Lena down the dimly lit hallway, the flickering overhead lights casting ghostly shadows that danced along the peeling wallpaper. I could hear her hurried footsteps echoing in front of me, but behind us, the silence was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked, trying to catch up to her. "I mean, it's just a room, right? What could possibly—" "It's not just a room," she interrupted, her voice a sharp whisper filled with urgency. "Something is in there. I saw it." A knot formed in my stomach as we reached room 5. The door was slightly ajar and a faint, flickering light seeped through the gap, casting an eerie glow onto the floor. Lena paused, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "Just stay close to me," she said, her voice trembling. I nodded, though my heart was pounding in my chest, each beat reverberating like a drum roll of impending doom. We stepped forward, and I pushed the door open the rest of the way, revealing a chaotic scene inside. The room was a mess. Furniture was overturned, sheets were strewn about, and the small lamp on the bedside table flickered erratically, casting strange, elongated shadows across the walls. But it was what lay in the center of the room that caught my attention. A figure, indistinct and shadowy, hovered just above the bed, its form shifting and pulsating as if it were made of smoke and darkness. I froze, my mind racing with disbelief. Was this real? Was I dreaming? "What is that?" I whispered, taking a step back. "I don't know," Lena replied, her voice barely audible, "but it's been here since I checked in. It whispers. It calls to me when I try to sleep." The figure seemed to sense our presence, turning slowly toward us, and for a moment, I thought I saw a face, twisted and contorted in agony. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the very atmosphere were alive and writhing with unseen terror. "We need to leave," I urged, my instincts screaming at me to run. But before I could move, the figure surged forward, a rush of dark energy that sent a wave of dread washing over me. I stumbled backward, colliding with the doorframe, my heart racing as I watched the entity draw closer. "Help me," Lena cried, tears streaming down her face. "Please." Just then, a loud bang echoed from the room, and the light flickered violently, plunging us into darkness. I felt Lena's hand grasp mine, and together we turned to flee. But the moment we stepped into the hallway, the door slammed shut behind us with a deafening crash. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted down the corridor, pulling Lena along as we raced toward the front desk. I could hear the sound of whispers trailing behind us, a chorus of anguished voices that seemed to taunt us as we ran. "Keep going," I shouted, my breath coming in ragged gasps. We reached the lobby, and I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. The glow from the neon sign outside painted the room in a surreal light, and I turned to Lena, my heart racing. "What was that thing?" "I don't know," she sobbed, collapsing into a chair. "I thought I was going crazy. I thought I was just tired, but it's real. I swear it's real." I looked at her, fear gnawing at my insides. "We need to call someone. We need to." "No," she interrupted, rising to her feet. "You don't understand. The rules. You can't call for help." The weight of her words sank in, and I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" "The rules," she said, her eyes wide and frantic. "Carl, he knows. He's the one who keeps it contained." "Contained?" I echoed, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" Lena glanced nervously at the door. "If you break the rules, it'll get out. You saw what was in there. It can't be let loose." The thought sent a chill down my spine. I recalled the rules Carl had laid out for me, each one ringing ominously in my mind. No room 13. Never allow anyone to check into room 7 after midnight. Keep the door locked after 11 p.m. "Why didn't you tell me?" I demanded, frustration bubbling up alongside my fear. "I thought I could handle it," she replied, her voice trembling. "I thought it was just a nightmare." Just then, a loud knock echoed from the front door, making us both jump. I turned, heart racing, as the noise continued, sharp and insistent. "What do we do?" Lena whispered, her eyes wide with terror. We wait," I stammered, feeling the dread settle heavily in my chest. "That's what Carl said, right? Just don't answer it." The knocking intensified, a relentless barrage that reverberated through the lobby. It was impossible to ignore. "What if it's someone who needs help?" Lena pleaded, her voice rising in panic. "What if—" "Stay quiet," I hissed, glancing toward the door. The urgency of the situation clawed at me, but the memory of the rules held me in place. Then, as if in response to our silence, the knocking stopped. A heavy stillness filled the air, broken only by the sound of our quickened breaths. After a few moments of tense silence, I dared to approach the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the small window, but the night outside was a void, an inky blackness that swallowed all light. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaking. Silence. Just then, a low, mournful sound filled the air, almost like a whispering wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere all at once. My skin prickled, and I stepped back, glancing at Lena, who was now frozen in fear. "What was that?" she breathed, her eyes wide. "I don't know," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "but we need to stay quiet." As the minutes stretched into eternity, the tension in the air became palpable. The shadows around us felt alive, creeping closer as if they were waiting for the right moment to pounce. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness. The low whispering grew louder, an indistinct chorus that seemed to weave through the fabric of the night, and panic surged through me once more. "What is happening?" I gasped, feeling the walls closing in. "We need to get out of here," Lena urged, her voice rising in fear. "Please, we have to leave." "Where can we go?" I asked, desperate and feeling trapped. "The only exit is through that door." But before we could formulate a plan, the lights flickered back to life, revealing a figure standing at the entrance. It was Carl. Carl stood in the doorway, his face shadowed but his eyes glinting with an unsettling intensity. "What's going on?" he demanded, stepping into the lobby. "Carl, there's something in room 5, I exclaimed, my heart racing. "We saw it. It was like a shadow, and it—" "I told you not to go near that room," he interrupted sharply, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not supposed to break the rules." The anger in his voice made me recoil, and I shot a glance at Lena. "What do you mean break the rules? We didn't know." "There are rules for a reason," he barked, his expression darkening. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. You shouldn't have gone in there." But she was scared, I protested, my voice rising in desperation. We had to help her. Carl shook his head, frustration etched into his features. You don't get it. This isn't just a job. The Pines is different. There are forces at work here that you can't comprehend. What forces? Lena asked, her voice trembling as she edged closer to me. He turned his gaze to her, his expression softening slightly. The motel has its own rules that keep the darkness contained. Room 5 is a nexus of energy, a focal point for something ancient and malevolent. You were lucky to get out when you did. What does that mean? I asked, my mind racing. What happens if we don't follow the rules? He hesitated, his eyes flickering to the door as if anticipating an impending threat. It means that whatever is in that room can escape. It can take form. It can come for you. Lena gasped, and I felt the weight of his words settle like a stone in my stomach. What do we do? I asked, my voice shaking. First, you need to understand the rules, Carl said, his voice low and serious. No one checks into room 13. Room 7 is off limits after midnight, and you must never. A loud crash echoed from the direction of room 5, followed by an unsettling silence. Carl stiffened, eyes wide with alarm. We need to get out of here, now. He turned, moving swiftly toward the front door, and I followed instinctively. But as I reached for the handle, the door slammed shut on its own, as if an unseen force was holding it in place. What the hell? I exclaimed, pulling at the handle in a panic. Don't fight it, Carl shouted. We need to find another way out, quick. But the flickering lights began to dim again, and I could feel the air grow heavier, thick with dread. I looked at Lena, her face pale and filled with fear, and I could only imagine what horrors awaited us if we stayed. The sounds of whispers returned, swirling around us like a storm, echoing with desperate pleas and anguished cries. I could feel the temperature drop, a cold wave washing over me as shadows began to creep along the walls, twisting and writhing as if alive. Follow me, Carl shouted, leading us toward the back of the lobby. We dashed down a narrow hallway that led to a door marked, staff only. I hesitated for a moment, but the sounds from the front lobby grew louder, the whispers turning into agonized screams that clawed at my mind. I pushed through the door, my heart racing. The back room was cluttered with old furniture, forgotten mementos, and the remnants of past guests. A single dim bulb flickered overhead, illuminating the chaos of the space. Where do we go? I gasped, panting as I tried to catch my breath. There's a basement, Carl said, urgency lacing his tone. We can hide there until the danger passes. The basement? Lena echoed, her eyes wide with fear. What's down there? Safety, Carl replied curtly, at least for now. He moved to a rickety door at the far end of the room, his hands shaking as he struggled with the lock. I could hear the sounds from the lobby growing closer, the whispers rising in intensity, each syllable laced with a dreadful promise. Finally, the door creaked open, revealing a set of steep stairs leading into darkness. Carl motioned for us to follow, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. What if it comes down there? I asked, my voice trembling. It can't reach us as long as we stay quiet, he said, his expression grave. Now hurry. We descended into the darkness, the air growing colder with each step. The faint light from above faded, leaving us enveloped in shadows. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, I could feel the oppressive weight of the darkness pressing in around us. There should be a flashlight down here, Carl muttered, searching the corners of the cramped space. We need to see what we're dealing with. As he rummaged through the clutter, I turned to Lena, my heart pounding. Are you okay? She nodded, though the fear in her eyes betrayed her. I can't believe this is happening. I thought it was just a motel. I nodded, unable to articulate the mix of terror and disbelief swirling in my mind. Just then, Carl emerged from the shadows, a dusty flashlight in hand. Got it, he said, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the damp walls and piles of debris around us. Stay close, he warned, directing the light toward the far wall. We need to find a place to hide. As we moved deeper into the basement, I could hear the whispers rising again, echoing through the confined space. The voices were a cacophony of despair, each one pulling at my mind, trying to coax me into the darkness. What is that? Lena whispered, her voice trembling. Just ignore it, Carl replied, though the tension in his voice suggested he was struggling to do the same. "We need to find a safe spot." We reached the far wall where a large wooden crate sat, partially hidden by old blankets. Carl moved to push it aside, but as he did, the whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a tempest of dread. "Just keep moving," I urged, feeling the panic rising in my chest. But just as Carl shifted the crate, a low growl echoed through the darkness, vibrating through the air like a distant thunder. "What was that?" I gasped, fear flooding my veins. "I don't know," Carl shouted, his voice tense. "Get behind the crate." We scrambled to obey, squeezing into the narrow space as the growling grew louder, more distinct, a guttural sound that sent chills racing down my spine. The flashlight flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls as the darkness pulsed around us. My heart raced as I pressed my back against the cold wood, praying that whatever was lurking out there wouldn't find us. And then the whispers stopped. Silence fell, thick and heavy, wrapping around us like a shroud. I held my breath, straining to hear any sound, any sign that the entity had left. But the stillness was deafening, each heartbeat echoing in my ears. "What's happening?" Lena whispered, her voice barely a breath. "I don't know," I replied, fear creeping into my voice. Just then, the flashlight flickered again, casting a weak glow around us. "Stay quiet," Carl whispered, his voice tense. "We can't draw attention." But even as he spoke, I could feel something shifting in the darkness, a presence that seemed to close in around us. And then a knock echoed from the door at the top of the stairs. The knock reverberated through the basement, a solid thud that sent shockwaves of fear racing through my body. "Don't move," Carl hissed, his voice low and tense. He directed the flashlight toward the stairs, illuminating the darkness just beyond our hiding spot. We held our breath, hearts pounding in unison, the oppressive silence wrapping around us like a suffocating blanket. Another knock came, louder this time, as if someone or something was impatiently demanding entry. "What do we do?" Lena whispered, her voice trembling. "We stay quiet," Carl replied, his eyes wide, darting between the stairs and us. "If it's whatever was in room 5, we can't let it know we're down here." I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in around us, the air thickening with an unseen dread. The knocking continued, insistent and unyielding, each sound echoing in my mind like a countdown to something terrible. Suddenly, the door at the top of the stairs creaked open, and a sliver of light pierced the darkness, illuminating the steps leading down. "Carl," a voice called, echoing down into the basement. It was the manager, his tone sharp and urgent. "What's going on down there?" I felt a wave of relief wash over me, but it was quickly overshadowed by the realization that we couldn't let him come any closer. "Don't answer," I hissed, grabbing Lena's arm tightly. Carl's expression was a mix of confusion and fear as he hesitated, his eyes flickering between the light above and the shadows surrounding us. "Carl," the voice called again, growing more frantic. "We need to know what's happening." Just then, the flashlight flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness once more. I felt Lena squeeze my hand tightly, her breath quickening in fear. "What do we do?" she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "Just wait," Carl replied, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "If it's coming for us, we need to stay hidden." But as the seconds stretched into eternity, I could feel the atmosphere shift. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, swirling around us like a storm of voices, each one taunting and desperate, filled with anguish. And then I heard it, the sound of footsteps approaching the stairs. My heart raced as I strained to listen, every instinct screaming at me to run. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, heavy and purposeful, as if whoever or whatever was coming down knew exactly where to find us. "Carl," the voice called again, this time sounding more frantic. "We need to get you out of there." But Carl remained silent, the tension in the air growing thick. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and a shadow fell over the top of the stairs. I could see a figure standing there, its outline indistinct but menacing. "Come on, man," the voice shouted, desperation lacing its tone. "I don't know what's going on, but we need to leave." The figure moved closer to the edge, and I felt a surge of panic rise in my chest. "It's not him," I whispered urgently. "It's not Carl." But before I could warn them, the figure stepped into the light, revealing a twisted and contorted face that sent a wave of terror coursing through me. "Run," I shouted, but it was too late. The figure lunged forward, reaching for the flashlight, and the room was flooded with light once more. In that moment, I saw the truth. The face staring back at us was not Carl, but a grotesque imitation, its features distorted and unnatural, eyes hollow and filled with an insatiable hunger. "Get away," Carl shouted, pushing us back as he moved to confront the creature. But the entity was faster, reaching for him with long, shadowy fingers that seemed to stretch and writhe as it grasped at the air. I pulled Lena close, trying to shield her from the chaos unfolding before us. "We have to get out of here," I urged, my heart racing as I backed away from the monster. Just then, a loud crash echoed from the top of the stairs, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps descending. "Carl," the voice shouted again, and in that moment, a second figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was the real Carl, his face etched with fear as he took in the scene before him. "What the hell is going on?" he shouted, his eyes darting between the creature and us. The entity turned its gaze toward the real Carl, its mouth twisting into a cruel smile as it seemed to feed off the confusion and fear in the air. In that instant, I knew we had to act fast. "We have to go," I shouted, pulling Lena toward the far wall. Carl stepped forward, his expression grim. "Stay back," he shouted, brandishing the flashlight like a weapon. But the creature lunged forward, and I felt a surge of adrenaline course through me. "Now," I yelled, and we sprinted toward the far end of the basement, hearts pounding as the whispers grew louder, echoing in our ears like a siren's call. We reached a narrow doorway hidden in the shadows, and without hesitation, I pushed through, dragging Lena behind me as we stumbled into a dark storage room filled with old boxes and forgotten relics. The door swung shut behind us, and we pressed against it, our breaths coming in ragged gasps as we tried to catch our breath. "What was that?" Lena gasped, her voice trembling. "I don't know," I panted, shaking with fear, "but we have to find a way out." The room was filled with darkness, but I could see a faint light filtering through a crack in the far wall. "Over there," I said, pointing toward the light. "We might be able to squeeze through." We hurried to the far side of the room, and as we approached the crack, I could feel the air shift, a sense of urgency urging us forward. But just as we reached the light, the door behind us rattled, a low growl echoing from the other side. "No," I shouted, fear gripping my heart. "We have to go now." With shaking hands, I pushed against the wall, feeling the wood splinter beneath my touch as the growling grew louder, more insistent. Finally, the crack widened enough for us to squeeze through, and I pulled Lena along with me, forcing my body through the narrow gap as the door burst open behind us. We tumbled into the next room, a dimly lit hallway that stretched before us, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "We need to keep moving," I said, glancing back at the doorway as I heard the entity growling again. We raced down the hall, the whispers trailing behind us like a dark fog, each step pounding in my ears. "What's happening?" Lena gasped, her voice a mix of fear and confusion. "I don't know," I shouted, pushing forward, "but we can't stop." We reached a staircase leading back up to the lobby, and I could hear the chaos above, the sounds of furniture being overturned and anguished cries filling the air. "Carl," I shouted, but there was no response. We climbed the stairs, each step feeling heavier as the darkness pressed in around us. As we reached the top, I could see the lobby in disarray, the front desk overturned and the chairs scattered across the floor. "Where is he?" I murmured, fear creeping back into my chest. And then I saw it, a shadow flickering near the back door, a shape moving in the darkness. "Over there," I pointed, urging Lena to follow as we raced toward the figure. But as we approached, I felt a chill wash over me, a wave of dread that froze me in place. The figure turned, revealing the twisted face of the entity, its eyes filled with a hunger that sent a jolt of terror through my body. "Run," I shouted, pulling Lena back as the creature lunged forward, its shadowy form stretching toward us. We darted toward the front door, but just as we reached it, the door slammed shut, trapping us inside. "No," I screamed, pounding against the door, but it wouldn't budge. The creature loomed closer, its presence suffocating as the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, filling the air with a cacophony of despair. "We have to get out," Lena cried, panic rising in her voice. "Help me," I shouted, turning to the windows, but they were sealed shut, the darkness outside swallowing any light. And then, just as despair threatened to overtake us, I remembered the rules. "Carl," I shouted, my mind racing. "The rules, we have to follow them." Lena looked at me, confusion flickering in her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Room 13, I exclaimed, feeling the weight of the words settle into place. "We have to break the rules. That's the only way to escape." The entity paused, its twisted form flickering as if caught in the balance between realms, and in that moment, I felt a surge of determination. "Come on," I urged, pulling Lena toward the hallway. We dashed past the front desk, dodging the creature's outstretched hand as it lunged for us, and we raced down the corridor toward room 13. As we approached the door, I could feel the whispers rising again, a desperate chorus pleading for release. "Are you ready?" I asked Lena, and she nodded, fear etched across her face. I pushed open the door, and we stepped into the darkness, the air thick with tension. But the moment we crossed the threshold, everything shifted. The darkness swirled around us, a maelstrom of energy that pulsed with a life of its own. And then, in an instant, the whispers stopped. We were enveloped in silence, the shadows falling away as a blinding light engulfed us. The light was overwhelming, filling every corner of the room as I squinted against the brightness. I felt Lena's hand slip from mine, and panic surged through me. "Lena," I shouted, but my voice was swallowed by the brilliance. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the light faded, leaving us standing in an empty void. I blinked, disoriented, and looked around. "Where are we?" I gasped, my heart racing. Lena appeared beside me, her expression filled with shock. "I don't know. What just happened?" I could barely comprehend the swirling shadows around us, the echoes of the whispers still faintly resonating in the air. I think we broke the rules," I said, my voice trembling. But before we could process what was happening, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Carl, his expression grave as he approached us. "What did you do?" he demanded, his voice filled with a mix of anger and fear. "We had to escape," I exclaimed, my heart racing. The entity was coming for us. Carl shook his head, frustration etched across his features. "You don't understand. By breaking the rules, you've released it. It's out now, and it won't stop until it finds you." "What do you mean?" Lena cried, her voice rising in fear. "What are we supposed to do?" "You have to confront it," Carl said, his expression serious. "You have to face what you unleashed. Only then can you contain it." "But how?" I asked, feeling the weight of his words settle heavily in my chest. "Find the source," Carl said, gesturing toward the swirling shadows. "It feeds on fear and darkness. You have to face it and reclaim the light." I felt a surge of determination. "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath. "We can do this." Lena nodded, her eyes filled with resolve. As we stepped forward, the shadows began to swirl around us, and I could feel the presence of the entity lurking just beyond our reach, its whispers rising in intensity. We moved deeper into the void, the air thick with tension as the darkness pulsed around us. "Stay close," I urged, feeling the weight of the shadows pressing in on us. The whispers grew louder, a chorus of desperate voices pleading for release, and I could feel the fear rising in my chest. But I pushed it down, focusing on the light within me, the strength that had brought us this far. Suddenly, the shadows coalesced, forming a figure that towered above us, its twisted form a grotesque parody of humanity. "Why have you come?" the entity hissed, its voice a low growl that reverberated through the void. "We've come to stop you," I said, my voice shaking but resolute. "We're not afraid anymore." The creature laughed, a chilling sound that echoed through the darkness. "You think you can confront me? I am fear itself. I thrive on your despair." But even as it spoke, I could feel the light within me growing stronger, pushing back against the shadows. "Your power is nothing without fear," I said, my voice rising above the cacophony. "We choose hope instead." The entity paused, confusion flickering in its hollow eyes. "Hope," it hissed, its voice dripping with disdain. "What good is hope in the face of darkness?" But as it spoke, the light within me surged, filling the void with warmth and brightness. "Hope is everything," I declared, stepping forward with confidence. "It's what allows us to face our fears, to stand against the darkness." The entity recoiled, its form flickering as the shadows writhed in agony. "Stop," it screeched, its voice filled with rage. "You cannot defeat me." But I could feel the power of the light growing stronger, pushing back against the darkness. Lena stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're not afraid of you. We won't let you control us anymore." And with that declaration, the light exploded, filling the void with brilliance and driving the shadows back. The entity screamed, its form dissolving into wisps of darkness that faded into nothingness. As the light engulfed us, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, a wave of warmth that washed away the fear and doubt. And then, in an instant, the void disappeared, replaced by the familiar surroundings of the Pines Motel. We stood in the lobby, the chaos of the earlier moments replaced by an eerie calm. What just happened?" Lena breathed, her eyes wide with disbelief. "I think we did it," I said, my voice trembling with emotion. But before we could process the moment, the front door swung open and Carl stepped inside, his expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "You made it," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "You actually made it." We exchanged glances, the weight of what we had faced settling in. "Is it over?" Lena asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I think so," Carl replied, looking around the now quiet lobby. "But we have to be careful. Darkness can come back when we least expect it." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "We have to stay vigilant." But as we stood together, a sense of hope filled the air, a light that pushed back against the darkness. "We'll face whatever comes next," I said, determination rising within me. And as we stepped out of the Pines Motel, leaving the darkness behind, I knew that together we could overcome anything.